war history through the Tucson Civil War Roundtable. And she's particularly interested in individuals. And she's a former presenter. She did a great job on a presentation called Jews in the Civil War a couple of years ago. So, and if you know Cindy and you get an email from her, you know that she is a cat lover. And so without further ado, my good friend Cindy Lachin, Varina Davis, First Lady of the Confederacy.
Thank you, Gene. That was very nice. Okay, everybody's muted, I hope, in the video. You can turn yourself off. Okay, all right. I want to start off saying, why did I pick Varina Davis? What was interesting to me about her? Well, there were two things. I was going to do a presentation on women in the Civil War, but there was like over 360 women, so I would have to break it down. And while I was reading one book by Cokie Roberts, which I'll show at the end, I saw some information on Varina Davis, and I thought, this is interesting. I'd like to learn more about her. So that was another reason. And another reason is March is Women's History Month. So I decided, why not? Varina Davis was born in Natchez, Mississippi. A lot of resources that I have show that she was born in Louisiana across from Natchez. But the more resources that I found said that she was born in Natchez, so I chose Natchez as her birthplace. She was the daughter of William Burrell Howe and Margaret Louisa Kemp. Her father was from a distinguished family in New Jersey. Her grandfather, Richard Howe, served several times as governor of New Jersey. William became a clerk in the Bank of the United States. Varina lived in this house called the Briars for most of her life until adulthood. She was sent to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania for her education at Madame Deborah Grey-Lude's French School for Young Ladies. In 1843, at age 17, Varina was invited to spend the Christmas season at Hurricane Plantation, the property of family friend Joseph Davis. While at Hurricane Plantation, Varina met Joseph's brother, Jefferson Davis, who was 18 years her senior. He was a 35-year-old widower. He was married to Sarah Knox Taylor, daughter of Davis's commanding officer, Zachary Taylor, who became the 12th president. His wife, Jefferson Davis's first wife, died of malaria 3 months after they were married. It was said that Jefferson Davis never got over her death. Jefferson Davis married Varina Howe on February 26, 1845. It was a very stormy marriage because of his absence in the Mexican War, his strong-mindedness over family matters, and the difference in their personalities as well as their age. However, the marriage did last until his death. After Varina married Jefferson Davis, they settled in Briarfield Plantation, which is located in Davis Bend, Mississippi. Jefferson Davis was elected to the Senate under James K. Polk, and then he became the Secretary of War and returned to the Senate under President Franklin Pierce. That's him up there. The next 15 years, Varina and Jefferson lived in Washington, D.C. She loved her time in Washington, D.C. She liked the city life. Varina made many friends in Washington, D.C. One was Minnie Blair, daughter of Postmaster General Montgomery Blair. Now, I picked this friend because back where I'm from in my county, in Montgomery County, Maryland, they have a high school called Montgomery Blair High School. So I got really excited about that. These are her first 4 children. The one woman that you see was the only one out of all 6, because she had 2 more during the Civil War years that lived to adulthood. She lost all 5 of them, except for Margaret. Daughter Varina Ann Davis known as Winnie Davis, was considered the first daughter of the Confederacy. I'll get more on her as we go along. This is just a little bookmark I saw on her children, and I will tell you about her children real quick. We had Samuel Emery Davis, who was born July 30th, 1852, and he died June 30th, 1854 of an undiagnosed disease. I'm sorry. The next one was Margaret Howe Davis, born February 25th, 1855. She married Joel Addison Hayes Jr., and they lived first in Memphis, Tennessee, and later they moved to Colorado Springs. She was the only one that lived to adulthood. Then there was Jefferson Davis Jr., who was born in 1857, and he died in that was Margaret, I'm sorry. Jefferson Davis Jr., and he died in Memphis, Tennessee of yellow fever at age 21. Then there was Joseph Evan Davis, born on April 18th, 1859, died at the age of 5 due to an accidental fall on April 30th, 1864, and I'll get to that later on. William Howe Davis was born on December 6, 1861, and he died of diphtheria. Then we had Winnie. She was born June 27th, 1864, and she died at age 34, which I'll get into that some more, in 1898. Jim Limber Davis was an orphan boy of mixed white and black descent who lived with the family from February 18th, 1864 until the family was captured by Union forces in May 1865. Varina had seen him being beaten on the street by a woman, and she went and grabbed him and took him, and they considered him the 7th child. And after they took him away, she spent some of her time looking for him, and she never found him. This is Peggy Schott, an actress who on Broadway or on stage was Varina Davis. Now, in order to get her to speak, I had to find the URL, but I couldn't find the URL, and I didn't want to mess anything up. So I will just tell you what she talked about. She talked about in this vignette that I got that Jefferson Davis wanted her to be the perfect first lady. She tried, quote, she tried, Lord knows she tried, unquote. She wouldn't have to hold her tongue, and she wasn't the type of woman that would hold her tongue. She was afraid that if she didn't hold her tongue, that she would go wild. She talked about the loss of her 2 children, and the interviewer wanted to know that. And she also told the interviewer that the Lord giveth, quote, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. The interviewer expresses his condolences, and she told him she didn't want his pity. And after she went through that, she asked him, which I found very interesting, at the end of the interview, if he wanted some tea. So I thought that was very interesting. Being on the wrong side of history carries consequences. And it was with great trepidation when Varina learned that her husband had been selected as the first president of the Confederate States of America. She didn't want to leave Washington. She just loved Washington. She carried out her duties with fortitude, and there were questions of her loyalty to Confederacy. That's why she had that quote, bringing on the wrong side of history carries consequences, because some of her extended family members served in the Union Army. Jefferson Davis was inaugurated February 18th, 1861 in Montgomery, Alabama. However, Varina did not attend the inauguration. I couldn't tell you why, but she didn't attend it. The first Confederate White House was located in Montgomery, Alabama. May 26th through May 29th, 1861, the Confederate White House was moved to Richmond, Virginia. This is a picture of her as the First Lady of the Confederacy. Varina Davis tells her mother, the Confederacy does not have the resources to win the Civil War. Then she tells her husband that if the Union wins the Civil War, it would have been God's will. Then she was known to have said that the South did not have the material resources to win the war, and white Southerners did not have the qualities necessary to win it. That her husband was unfit for political life, that maybe women were not the inferior sex, and that perhaps it was a mistake to deny women the suffrage before the war. She also supported states' rights, and she did comment that she feared the federal government might turn into a monarchy. She later declared emancipation was unconstitutional and denounced abolitionists for the attacks on the Constitution. In 1862, Briarfield and Hurricane Plantation were sacked. Varina was upset about losing her belongings. They eventually showed up in museums and private collections. The war is the most undocumented period of Davis's marriage. Neither kept a diary about that. Varina loved her husband despite his faults, which he had many. Abnormally sensitive to criticism, at times a poor judge of personalities, and he became easily depressed. He was a very sickly man. As George McClellan's army was getting closer to Richmond, Jefferson Davis sent his family out of the city. They went to Raleigh, North Carolina, and he ended up in places like Danville, Virginia. Her departure was criticized, showing a lack of faith in the Southern Army. Excuse me, I have to get my notes page here. April 30th, 1864 was when 5-year-old Joseph Davis died, and he was from a fall from the balcony of the Confederate White House in Richmond, Virginia. Varina received sympathy for this. In 1864, several of the Davises' domestic slaves escaped. James Dennison and his wife Betsy, Varina's maid, saved up money to finance their escape. Henry, the butler, left one night, allegedly setting fire in the mansion's basement to divert attention. On April 2nd, 1865, Robert E. Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant in Appomattox, Virginia. In April 15th, 1865, President Lincoln is assassinated in Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. Jefferson Davis was captured in Irwinville, Virginia. That's where he met his wife. That's where they came together. The years after the Civil War brought further trials for Varina Davis. Her husband was accused of conspiring to kill Abraham Lincoln. So they went on the run separately. And as I just said, they met up in Irwinville, Virginia, and Jefferson Davis was captured there. It was said that he was trying to escape in women's clothes. But what I had read and what I learned is that actually Varina just put a robe around him. Varina Davis assumed the management of the household. She found time to write a 1,600-page memoir that remains a basic source for the man who was a Mississippi senator and Confederate president. He was imprisoned in Fort Monroe for 2 years, Fort Monroe, Virginia, for 2 years, 1865 through 1867. During his president, Varina campaigned tirelessly with Andrew Johnson, who became the president after Lincoln was assassinated. That's for you, Elise. She campaigned for her husband's release. During his confinement, he was shackled, and they kept a light on in his room all the time, and his health began to deteriorate terribly. And Varina, of course, was concerned about him. Because of his confinement, his health started to deteriorate. She would meet with Andrew Johnson many, many times. He finally relented and released Jefferson Davis on bail. Now, his bail, which was very interesting, was paid for by Horace Greeley, who was the founder of the New York Tribune newspaper, and he was an abolitionist. After Jefferson Davis's release from prison, they moved to England, where he started a commission house. A commission house is where you sell things for commission and you get money on them. Unfortunately, the business collapsed. Then he returned to Minnesota. He returned to Memphis, Tennessee, and he worked for an insurance company which went bankrupt. In 1867, the Davises went to Canada because he sent his kids to Canada with a relative, and he was reunited with their children. Jefferson Davis fell in love with a woman named Virginia Clay. He carried on a passionate correspondence with her. They never had a physical relationship. Virginia Clay was the wife of Clement Clay, who was also imprisoned at Fort Monroe. They were suspected of being, they were also suspected of a plot against killing Abraham Lincoln. They became friends, and that's when Jefferson Davis carried on his passionate correspondence. They became closer friends during this time. Davis was reported to be seen on a train with Virginia Clay. During that time, divorce was very difficult to obtain, and it would have caused a scandal. So it never did happen, and this was not discussed in any of Davis's writings. Jefferson Davis lived out his retirement years in an estate called Beauvoir in Biloxi, Mississippi. Sarah Dorsey, a prominent widow in the South, heard of Jefferson Davis's problems and invited his family to live in a cottage on the plantation of Beauvoir. Dorsey, realizing that she was sick and she was going to die soon, changed her will and left the plantation to the Davis family. Oh, let me go back. I'm sorry. Davis lived out his life there, and he died of acute bronchitis in New Orleans, Louisiana. Varina did not want to stay there. She did not like it. So upon his death, she moved to New York City with her daughter, Winnie. With her decision to move up north, her and Winnie were considered Confederate carpetbaggers. That means leaving the South to go up to the North to work and live, just as the Northern people that came down south were considered carpetbaggers as well. She was criticized by conservative white Southerners. She explained that she did not feel comfortable at Beauvoir and she liked living in the big city. She needed to get a job to work because her husband had left her little property. Varina worked for Joseph Pulitzer's New York World. She was a very good reporter, and it was at one point that she even interviewed Frederick Douglass. Winnie dies in 1898. She had gone on speaking tours, and she had stomach problems, and she got caught in a big rainstorm, and she got really, really sick. And that was the fifth out of her 6 children that died, and that was considered Varina's favorite. She had met, she sold Beauvoir to the Mississippi Division of the Sons of the Confederate Veterans for $10,000. The facility was to be used as a Confederate Veterans Home and later as a memorial to her husband. It is now the Jefferson Davis Library and Museum in Biloxi, Mississippi. While she was in New York, she became friends with Julia Dent Grant, who was the wife of Ulysses S. Grant, the most hated man in the South. They would go on carriage rides together and all kinds of things. Grant was from Kentucky and was for the South. Their friendship was ignored by most of the conservative white Southerners. It wasn't looked upon very well. On October 6, 1906, I'm talking so fast, I'm sorry. Former Confederate First Lady Varina Davis died of double pneumonia at her apartment overlooking Central Park in New York City. She was 80 years old. She was buried next to her whole family in Hollywood Cemetery in Richmond, Virginia. Her plaque read as follows: "Sacred to the memory of Varina Howe Davis, beloved and faithful wife of Jefferson Davis, and devoted mother of his children. Her children arise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praiseth her. She stretched out her hand to the poor. Yea, she reached forth her hands to the needy. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates. Her legacy included, they had a funeral procession through the streets of New York City, which was led by her pastor of her church. There is a portrait of Mrs. Davis, widow of the Confederacy. It's held at the museum at Beauvoir. Another portrait of Winnie is held at the Museum of the Confederacy. That was a separate museum. Now it's just called the Civil War Museum. August 29, 2005, Hurricane Katrina caused extensive damage to the Beauvoir, which housed the Jefferson Davis Presidential Library. The home was restored and reopened on June 30th, 2008. Some of the resources I used was a very famous book, well, the most important book by Joan E. Cashin, First Lady of the Confederacy, Virginia Davis's Civil War. Then I read the book, which I learned more about her, by Cokie Roberts, called Capital Dames, The Civil War and the Women of Washington, 1848 to 1868. Then I read a book, Jerry Vanderhevel, Crowns of Thorns and Glory, Mary Todd Lincoln and Varina Davis, the two first ladies of the Civil War. Now they had some things in common and they had a lot that weren't in common, but Mary Todd Lincoln would have to be another presentation. And then I used various online sites. Now, this is the end. I know, I'm sorry if I talk too fast, but I want to send out 3 thank yous to 3 people that were very helpful to me in preparing this presentation. Jean Bryant, Elise Moore, and Jerry Stanvik. Without them, I don't know what would have happened, but I have to thank those 3 very much. That's all I have on Varina Davis.
Well, that was absolutely so interesting, Cindy. That was really great. And I really want to encourage everyone to put a comment or a question into the chat. We do have a couple of questions here. And don't feel under the gun, Cindy, to answer these things. And in fact, if you run into any trouble answering anything, maybe one of our other members can pop in. But anyway, here's our first question. Do you happen to know if the Davis family was in Raleigh when Sherman captured Raleigh?
Now, what I've read, and if anybody else can answer it, that's fine, is that he wasn't. He just sent her to Raleigh. And then she kept moving around. She didn't stay in one place very long. She kept moving around.
Okay, so in other words, she was not in Raleigh when Sherman got there.
That's what I understand.
Okay, and another question, and it's the same kind of question. So did she go, the questioner says, go on the lam?
Yes, she did.
When Sherman approached, or had she left before Sherman was even on the way?
Well, like I said before, while Sherman was on the way, Jefferson Davis found out and didn't want her, to get into trouble. So he sent her to Raleigh and he went on to Danville. But they went to different places and they lived among friends. A lot of friends that she knew had to house her and her kids.
Great. Another question is, so, and I think you might have mentioned this in your talk, but maybe you can just talk about it a little bit more. The questioner says, what happened to the little boy that she saved on the street?
Well, what I understand is that he went off and she couldn't find him, so she really didn't know.
Okay.
Anybody else knows about? Feel free.
Yeah, okay. Then a couple other questions. And by the way, when you put something into the chat, be sure and make sure it's to everyone, not to me personally. That's very helpful if you can do that so everyone can see your questions as well. Another question that came up here is, you mentioned that there was a 1,600-page memoir. Was that the memoir of Jefferson Davis?
Yes.
Yes.
She wrote on Jefferson Davis, not herself.
Okay, and did Jefferson Davis dictate that memoir? Or was he
I
involved?
don't know that answer.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry.
So she was the writer for that?
Yes, that's what she did. Yes.
And then that was published in the South and.
I don't know all the, I'm sorry. I mean, I
Okay.
can look that up, but
Yeah, that's interesting. You mentioned another question here. You mentioned another woman, Virginia Clay.
yeah.
And can you go over again when he might have met her? And
Well, he met her because her husband was in the same prison. So he met her when she would come visit and everything, and they became friends. And Jefferson Davis really liked her. So when he got out, he started writing all these romantic letters, and that's then he eventually stopped because she remarried because he had died. He eventually died.
okay,
And that was, like I said, divorce wasn't an option back then.
right. Let's see, one other question. You mentioned that the family went to Canada.
Yeah.
And can you tell us a little bit more? Do you know anything more about their time in Canada?
No.
Okay.
No, all I know is that they went there and got reunited because there was a relative, and those are all great questions, by the way. Great questions. I wish I had more information to give you all. I mean, I could look it up if you want me to.
No, that's just great. It's just always interesting that, people are thinking about what you've presented.
Oh, thank you, Elise.
And then one of our wonderful members mentioned, he says, this is Paul Kalina, says, just a footnote, Mrs. Davis and Mrs. Lincoln shopped for jewelry at the same store in Washington, D.C.
Wow.
He said, I forget the name, but it was still in business in the 1980s.
Oh, wow. I never knew that one. Because I had understood that Mary Lincoln didn't want to meet her. That's what I had read,
Right.
Well, Mary Lincoln, she was a very troubled woman.
Right.
Very troubled.
And I just wanted to add a little something. Probably Barb Carter knows even more about this than I do.
Probably more than me too.
But you mentioned a couple of slaves escaping the household. And my understanding was that at least Betsy and then the slave who was a coachman were actually Union spies.
Oh,
Working
read that.
The Union spy master in Richmond, Virginia, whose name is escaping me, but that is exactly who Barb Carter reenacted for us last year.
Oh, okay.
So there's a little connection between, between these women. All right. Well, let's see. Any other question? Oh, Paul Kalina added to his comment about the Mrs. Davis and Mrs. Lincoln shopping for jewelry at the same store. He added a comment, they did not shop together.
Right.
Okay. All
Thank
right.
you,
Well,
Paul.
this is a great presentation and so much really interesting information. Oh my goodness, you did a tremendous amount of work. Can't thank you enough. And I'm going to turn this back to Jean Bryan. Jean, can you unmute yourself and take it over?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, well, thank you, Cindy. As Elise said, well done. We knew it would be, and you delivered. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Can we still
Lots
ask
of
a
good
question
stuff
or two?
and lots of good questions. I never cease to be amazed at the level of knowledge of